Cheers, Rockets fans. Welcome to The Locker Line, an exclusive podcast from the home of the Rockets.
Whoa!
Sports Talk 790.
Rockets!
The Locker Line is proudly served to you by Carbox Clutch City Lager.
It is good!
Oh, yeah? Red Nation, get ready. Get ready. The Locker Line starts now.
Welcome aboard. Welcome in to another new episode of The Lager Line, as always served to you courtesy of Clutch City Lager of Carbach Brewing. I'm your host, Ben Dubose, editor of USA Today's Rockets Wire and a contributor to Sports Talk 790, the official flagship radio station of your Houston Rockets, joined by my good friend, co-host, and producer out of Portugal, Paulo Alves. Paulo, what's going on, man?
And everything's good, other than apparent rumors of Rockets signing Dillon Brooks. Everything's going well.
We'll get into that. We're going to do a lot more off-season focus today for a few reasons. First off, there's nothing new on the Rockets circuit until the May 16th draft lottery. They are bringing in a few draft prospects, but not really any of the names that most fans will recognize, because most of the big names, Victor Wembanyama, Scoot Henderson, that tier, they're waiting to schedule their workouts until after the draft lottery because, spoiler alert, Wemby is not going to work out for a team that's drafting 5th or 6th. They're waiting to see who's going to be at the top of that draft lottery. Hopefully it's the Rockets. And so now that Houston has made its head coaching hire with Ime Udoka, and obviously the Rockets are not in the playoffs, they're, other than a few draft workouts here or there, they're largely waiting around like the rest of us. There are interviews going on for Udoka's staff of assistants, but I think Ime is in no particular rush to fill those. The Rockets aren't really going to have any true game activity until closer to the draft, and of course they're going to get ready for the Las Vegas Summer League, so Ime Udoka will want to have some of his assistants by then. Typically an assistant coaches the Summer League team, but right now he can go through his interview process for those assistants, and the Rockets can just watch the playoffs with the rest of us as they wait for the draft combine in about 10 days, followed by the lottery that Tuesday night in Chicago. You can check out our archives where we just had a show with Clay Allen, general counsel of the Rockets, who will be in the room for that night. Hashtag pray for Victor. Anyway, to get back to the offseason focus, we've got one of my favorite offseason big picture Rockets guys on our show today. You know him best as Ime Udoka on Twitter. His real name, of course, David Weiner. You may also know him as assistant to the general manager, that being Rafael Stone. David, thanks for taking the time. How are you?
Doing great, Ben and Paulo. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, and we're going to be talking to you today. Well, I always love talking to you about off-season topics because this is your wheelhouse. You are great at the business of basketball. But we also have a new collective bargaining agreement with the NBA to dive into with regards to specifically the implications for the Rockets and what it means for team building, both this offseason and beyond. I've been wanting to do this show for weeks now because the NBA at the end of March, that's when they officially agreed to the new CBA. But there's been so much breaking news with the Rockets, the season ending, then the coaching search, then the hire of Ime Udoka, that we've put it on pause. Now that we're in this brief hiatus of off-season activity, it's a good time to have a bigger picture episode. And so that's what we're going to be doing with David Weiner today. Again, Ime Udoka on Twitter, unofficially assistant to the general manager of the Houston Rockets. David, before we get into the CBA nitty-gritty, I want to start with your thoughts on the process that led to Ime Udoka. Are you pleased with the way the coaching search went? What are your thoughts heading into this critical offseason in which the Rockets obviously have $60 million, give or take, in salary cap room? It's the last summer they controlled their draft pick for a while, so it's a huge pivot point for the franchise. They just named a new coach. Where are you at in terms of your 30,000-foot view of the franchise right now?
Well, I mean, this is the time we've all been waiting for the last 2.5 years. We were all looking to the summer of 2023 when we were going to have the cap room, roster flexibility, and unfortunately, Stephen Silas didn't work out in Houston. But Ime Udoka, I think, was a terrific hire. The only question about him, obviously, was the scandal that ended his tenure in Boston. And for me, from the beginning, that was obviously a big impediment. But if the parties could get comfortable with everything and have, not necessarily assurances, but a significant enough comfort level that that was not going to create ongoing problems, then Udoka was easily top of the list for me. So I'm glad everyone got comfortable. I'm sure there's work to be done on that front going forward, but purely as a coach, as a leader, as a motivator, as someone that's going to hold players accountable, I'm very thrilled with the Udoka hire.
I think one way the Udoka hire has been even better than I imagined going in has been watching the response around the league. You can tell that players, other coaches really respect this hire, and he brings a sort of credibility to the Rockets that the last couple of years it's felt like they lacked with a first-time head coach in Steven Silas and a first-time GM in Rafael Stone. Neither one of them has done it at the highest level before in those chairs. So to have someone who was just in the NBA Finals a year ago and carries that type of presence and respect, it's a big deal. And I've actually been thinking about it a little bit in the context of free agency because, David, we had a back and forth on Twitter the other day when you were asking me if I would give James Harden the max this offseason, not just in terms of financial money for next season, but in terms of years as well. Basically, a 4-year, $200 million deal, give or take. And the reason I've largely been in support of that for months, going back to really Christmas, which is when the rumor mill kicked up in overdrive regarding Harden and the Rockets and a potential reunion, is this idea that even if year 4 and maybe year 3 are an overpay, that beyond what Harden can give you the next couple of years as a floor general, the NBA's assists leader, his basketball values in the short term, that even if he ages poorly into his age 36 and age 37 seasons, it might be worth it because the Rockets have been so bad that the instant credibility you get from signing James Harden, that instant jolt back to relevancy and not having to worry about being a perpetual rebuild like the Kings until the last few years or the Timberwolves, the Jimmy Butler year notwithstanding, have been over the past decade or so. With the Ime Udoka hire, that gives me a much higher degree of confidence in the floor of this team moving forward. And while I'm not moving off James Harden, I'm not doing anything crazy, it might make me a bit more willing to draw a slightly harder line in negotiations in terms of, yeah, maybe I'll give you 3 years at the max, but that 4th year needs to be a team option. Because with Udoka, the value of the Harden credibility angle and the jolt back to relevancy, I don't know if you need that quite as much as you did before this hire, because it feels like with Ime Udoka, perhaps I'm drinking the Kool-Aid a bit too much, but it feels like with the connections he has, the respect he carries, I'm much more okay with the floor scenarios of if you don't get James Harden. And if this offseason is simply adding role players, maybe not Dylan Brooks. I know Paolo has thoughts on that, but it's made me a bit more comfortable in no matter what, they have a process forward that can work. David, does that make sense to you? This idea that now that you've invested heavily and you've got a big name coach, maybe it gives you a bit more flexibility heading into the offseason?
Yeah, no, I agree with that, Ben. You mentioned the credibility factor that I think Udoka gives you more credibility than some of the other choices would have. Um, and yeah, Harden, I'm in favor of Harden in a vacuum, not so much 4 years full max. And I generally agree with your sentiment that if it gives you a little more leverage, you might lose them, but still, the organization's already gained a significant amount of credibility with the coaching hire.
Yeah, I think about the Udoka stuff, something that I didn't say last pod when we talked about it, that I really feel now after the press conference and all of the interviews that they gave to multiple media outlets. It really feels like Rafael Stone and Ime Udoka are a team. It really feels like Udoka is going to have a big say in how the front office is going to act, and who knows how much impact Rafael will have and what the team will do. But every time they talk, they just seem to be in perfect alignment, and they always talk about it as a partnership, which makes me wonder how much of, now that that's the dynamic, how much of that was what Stone intended to do with Stephen Silas that just ended up not happening, and then all of the meddling stuff came around and all of those news. It makes me think that perhaps this is what Stone wanted with Silas, but it just didn't work out. And now when they got Udoka in, this is a guy that very much aligns with Rafael Stone's principles: defense first, versatility, everything like that. And so one of my quick biggest takeaways from everything we've heard about Udoka since our last pod is that it really feels like this is a team and that they're going to build together and that he's going to be a big voice in the room in whatever moves they make. And I like it because this is one of the top coaches on the market. He is still very young. He could be a franchise coach like Popovich is, like Spoelstra is, if it works out well. He's young enough. He's clearly good enough. I mean, how often does a coach that was in the finals a year ago join the team that has the worst record in the league if you combine the last 3 years? So I think it's an investment. I think it's a good thing. I think it's a good investment by the franchise in Udoka, both from what the on-court product looks like and how he can influence the team building part of it, which I think he will based on everything we've heard.
I also think, and David can jump in on this angle if he wants. I think it buys a lot of goodwill with the fan base because there's been these whispers for months. Is Rafael Stone too enamored with Kevin Porter Jr.? I know Paolo's got strong feelings on Dylan Brooks. I think whatever this roster ends up looking like heading into training camp, I'm not saying that you need to be a big believer personally in everyone that's on the roster. But I think one thing that should be good is that it sort of turns the page on whether there was dysfunction or not the last couple of seasons, this idea that something's off. Because at this point, Ime Udoka had options. There's the Toronto job that's open. Milwaukee just opened up today. He could have waited around the same way that Quinn Snyder did last offseason and getting a pretty good gig in Atlanta midway through this season. He did not have to take this job. So whatever moves the Rockets make or don't make, it's going to be pretty clear, in my opinion, that Ime Udoka is at least signing off on the direction of this roster, if not fully endorsing it or suggesting it himself. And so I think even if the roster isn't ideal for what we personally would want, I think it'll at least be a lot better than this past season when there were so many theories thrown out about Kevin Porter Jr. at point guard and what is Silas is doing, what is Rafael Stone's doing, and so on and so forth. You may not like every player on the roster. You may not agree with every move, but I think for a guy like Udoka to pick the Rockets, that should tell you that he's going to be on board with whatever marquee moves they make or don't make this summer. And that should, at least in the honeymoon stage, these first few months, that should provide a bit of peace for Rockets fans.
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest takeaway here is playtime's over. Udoka's the adult in the room, and whether or not, like you said, we don't know if there really was dysfunction or not. It's all the losses, you kind of lose the benefit of the doubt. But whether or not there was foolishness, that's over. It's time to focus. And then just the general GM coach dynamic. Usually the GM is thinking for the next 5 to 7 years, and the coach is really thinking about that season. And I really feel for Steven Silas. He thought he was coaching a contending team with James Harden and Russell Westbrook, and what he got was a complete teardown and rebuild. And during those types of phases in an organization, the coach is not going to get the players he wants. The GM is going to be looking longer term for the rebuild. And what we have now is we've entered phase 2, even as Tillman Fertitta's labeled it, where the team is now ready to win again. And there's going to probably be more alignment between the GM and the coach. Like you said, Udoka is definitely going to have significant input on player personnel moves. And I think that's more appropriate now than it was a couple of years ago.
Yeah,
It's
absolutely.
it really looks like, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it really strikes me as the same thing that's happening with the Texans, where you can, and I think this is more common in the NFL, but it really seemed like the Nico Ryans had a lot of input in how the draft went, and to adapt that to the Rockets. I mean, it always seemed like there was a disconnect between what the front office wanted to do and what Silas wanted to do. I mean, you don't go out and spend 2 first-round picks on Alperen Sengun, and then he gets the treatment that he did for 2 years running, as far as how he was used. And one last comment that I want to get in to kind of justify why I think that Stone might have tried to do the same thing with Silas early on and just ended up not working out. And then at that point, you're not going to fire a coach a year into a rebuild or 2 years into a rebuild. Do you guys remember early on, right after the Harden trade? Am I the only person that remembers a report that the reason we went after Victor Oladipo, or a part of it, was because Stephen Silas was a really big fan of him. Am I the only person that remembers this?
I don't remember the specific report, but certainly the impetus for picking Oladipo was that he was a more of a win now player. You higher risk, higher reward, but you were getting a recent All-Star. So it's very possible that Silas had, some say in that, and maybe that
Well,
influenced why we went for him.
and I do think he had more playmaking potential if he was healthy than Karis LeVert. We've talked the last couple of years about not having the Harden / Luka type option to really make Silas's offense work in, I suppose, the parallel to what he did with Luka in Dallas. Not that Oladipo in his prime was that, but Oladipo in his prime, if you could have gotten anywhere near that, was a lot closer than Karis LeVert. So yeah, it wouldn't surprise me if Silas was on board with that, and he wanted that more than, say, a high floor but low ceiling Karis LeVert.
And from Rafael's standpoint, it's kind of gives you more flexibility, because if he hits, great. If not,
Yeah.
he's an expiring contract instead of LeVert, who had 3 years on his deal at the time.
All right, let's transition to this offseason. Enough about 2021. We've got much better things to focus on when it comes to the current Houston Rockets. And actually, David, before we start you out with a specific question, this new CBA that was agreed to in late March and the term sheet just went out, does it go into effect this offseason? Just explain from a timeline perspective how this works moving forward.
Sure. So the deal was agreed to in principle in March. It took quite a while, and for good reason, to get even a term sheet. While I do not have a copy of the term sheet, it is widely reported that the term sheet, not the agreement, just the term sheet, was 91 pages long.
Wow.
So it took some time to put that together. The new CBA is still not technically in place. I believe the sides have ratified it in principle, but the actual language, the lawyers still need to bang that out. I'm sure they're working feverishly to get that done before the end of June. I do have a redline CBA of the 2017 changes, and that, in that CBA, aside from introducing the concept of two-way contracts, not a whole lot changed. In this CBA, they are changing a lot of stuff. So it may take some time. I'm sure they'll get it done by the end of June, but it's going to take them a little while longer to get it banged out. And as far as when it goes into effect, so many of the aspects will go into effect immediately. And because this is such a radical change in so many areas, they have built into, at least per the term sheet, they've built in some phase in on a lot of these things that we'll be talking about. Several of the new concepts are either going to be phased in or will not be introduced until 24-25.
Okay.
And in some cases, 25-26.
So at a super high level, when it comes to team building, I think the summations that I've seen characterize it as a win for the smaller market franchises. Think the Charlotte Hornets, Utah Jazz, and a bit of a hit to the big spending, huge market teams like the Warriors, the Clippers, the Nets, because unlike the previous CBA, when the primary penalty for going well into luxury tax territory, especially for repeated years, was financial, and a very rich owner could simply say, well, deal with it, I'm going to spend, and buy their way into consistent contention. The new CBA actually puts some team building penalties into play in terms of, if you're over the tax by a certain amount for a certain amount of years, then it constrains how you can actually build your roster moving forward. And that's different because an owner can't just say, look, here's a blank checkbook, deal with it. No, his GM is going to have to actually balance what spending at that level would do versus the hit that it would give to the organization from the standpoint of how they can fill out their roster and the tools they have at their disposal. So in terms of how this impacts the Rockets, which is of course what we cover at the Logger Line, the Rockets, I would say, are somewhere between 6 and 12. That's the range that I've thrown out in the past for, I would say, economic health and spending power of the franchise. They're not at the level of the Warriors or Lakers or Clippers. Let's not get crazy. And Tillman Fertitta, while a good owner, he has not shown us that he is willing to be Steve Ballmer. Let's not get carried away. However, they're also not the Charlotte Hornets or the Utah Jazz by any stretch of the imagination either. This is a good market. Tillman Fertitta has shown a willingness to spend on a number of things in recent years, including a new practice facility, $70 million, as Tillman let the secret out at the Ime Udoka press conference last week. This is an upper middle class, I suppose you could say lower upper class, but that sounds funky. So let's go with upper middle class market. So, David, generally speaking, for a team like the Rockets that's in probably the upper half of the league, but not the very tip top in terms of their willingness to spend, is this CBA good, neutral, or bad relative to where they would have stood under the previous CBA?
I think this CBA is very good for the Rockets.
Okay.
For all the reasons you explained. I don't know how granular you want to go because this could go on for 5 hours. But more big picture, this CBA is going to benefit most the teams that have relatively cleaner cap sheets, don't go above the current first apron, the apron level, and it rewards the teams that are a little more judicious with their roster building and their team salaries, and even rewards teams that go a little bit into the tax. They're trying to reduce some of the deterrence from going into the tax. I think teams are still going to want to avoid it, but the penalties for being a little bit in the tax are going to go down in the new CBA.
Okay, so it's basically easier to go a little bit into the tax and spend a bit more relative to what the Rockets have done. Of course, we're speaking proportionally here over, I suppose, their last contending window, going back to the late 2010s and the end of the James Harden era, the beginning of the Tillman Fertitta ownership era. It's a bit easier to go a little over the tax. It's just harder to spend at the Warriors, Clippers, insane level. That's basically what you're saying.
Correct. And I'll just knock this one out that for the moderate taxpayers, they're going to receive some benefits in this in a couple of ways. Number one, they're going to have more flexibility on salary matching and trades. It used to be once you were $1 over the tax, the restrictions got a whole lot tighter. If you're above the tax, below the apron, you can make trades like you were below the tax. In the coming years, the lower tax brackets for the luxury tax are actually going to go down to reward teams willing to. The union, I think, did a good job negotiating this to reward teams that are willing to spend, not go crazy, but willing to spend. Those are really the biggest things. The more flexibility in trades and lower tax brackets, but the biggest deterrent is still going to be there that you go $1 into the tax, you don't get luxury tax distributions. So that's going to be still a big impediment, which is why I think most teams are still going to try to duck the tax. But if you end up $3 million in the tax, it's not as bad as it would have been under the prior CBA.
It's very interesting. Just a quick follow-up. Do teams that are $1 over the tax, are they still prohibited from doing sign-on trades? Because I think that's really relevant to everything we're going to do.
So the way the current CBA is, and it's not changing in the new one, is if you are over the tax but under the apron, which will now be called the first apron, you can still do sign-in trades. You can still use the non-taxpayer mid-level. You can still use Ben's favorite biannual exception. But
they haven't done that in years, by the way.
Yeah. I
think it's to troll me, but anyway.
I think the last time they used it was on Tarek Black.
Wow. Tarek Black is the last Bay of the Rockets. Jesus, that's going back ways.
But so to kind of take a grander look out. So that was just for the teams in that tax line to first apron. And the first apron, again, for those who aren't too familiar with it, it's approximately $7 million above the tax. And that's going to change. All of these thresholds are going to start growing with the cap. So as the cap goes up, these threshold amounts are going to grow. So in 5 years from now, that $7 million gap is going to be 10, 11 million. So the biggest restrictions that Paolo kind of indicated there: no sign-in, you can't acquire a player via sign-in trade, you can't use the non-taxpayer mid-level, you can't use the biannual exception. Those were really the only three things. If you were above the first apron, those were the only three things you couldn't do. Under the new CBA, they're going to add more things you can't do.
That's very interesting.
Yeah.
So I want to eventually make my way to some of the more specific topics, because I'm really intrigued about whatever's new about incentive compensation, especially since Rockets, they have so much cap space, they'll be in a position to make use of that. But starting a little bit smaller, what are some of the changes when it comes to the exceptions, the TPEs, the one the Rockets are going to have access to, the room MLE? What changes about those compared to what it was before?
Sure. So salary cap exceptions are going to change pretty dramatically in the new CBA. The non-taxpayer mid-level, which is this past year was about 10.5 million. That's going to jump up to about 12.2 next year, which that's the biggest salary cap exception, general salary cap exception there is. And that's taken a little jump this year. The exception taking the biggest jump is the room exception, the room mid-level exception. This directly impacts the Rockets this summer because they're going to have cap room. The room mid-level exception is for teams that are below the cap, want to use their cap room, and this is something they can use in addition to cap room, rewarding the team for managing its cap. That room exception, which was about 5.4 million this past season, is going to jump all the way up to 7.6 million. It's a huge jump.
Yeah.
And so for the Rockets, they can use their whole 60 million in cap. Now you can't combine it with cap room, but they can use their whole 60 million in cap, go all the way up to the cap, and then on top of that, sign another player up to 7.6 million. And then conversely, so it used to be the room exception was only for 2 years. So it wasn't as good an exception as, for instance, the taxpayer mid-level, which last year was about 6.5 million, and you could sign a player for 3 years. So the tax teams actually got rewarded more than the teams that managed their cap well. So the new CBA flips the script there, I think, and I agree with this change. They don't want to punish teams that manage their cap better. They want to reward them. So basically, the room exception and the taxpayer mid-level are going to switch places. So while the room exception went way up and moved from 2 years to 3 years, the tax mid-level exception is going down to $5 million flat. And it'll grow with the cap, but for next year, 5 million flat, and you can't sign 3-year deals anymore. You can only sign 2-year deals. So they're going to punish. They're going to punish these teams that spend.
So the player the Rockets get, if they sign him for 3 years, of course, but they could actually get someone with the room MLE, and then at the end of that contract have bird rights on them to retain them, which was something that they couldn't do with the old one, because it was just 2 years. That's a pretty big deal, I think.
Yeah, no, you're right, Paulo. It is. I mean, you'd have early bird rights, and in most cases, anyone you could get with the room exception, you could probably afford to get with early bird. But who knows, if the person just blows up and becomes a star, you wouldn't have full bird rights. But yeah, you're right, Paulo. Now you'd have full bird rights on a 3-year deal.
And to put in perspective, in terms that I think a lot of Rockets fans that aren't salary cap nerds like David, sorry, you are.
Hey, you call it like you see it, man.
Yeah. To put it in terms that fans who aren't as cap inclined would understand, that higher room exception going to nearly $8 million as a starting salary, you could theoretically use your $60 million on 2 players, like, I don't know, hypothetically, James Harden and Dillon Brooks. Let's just throw those out there. I know the name Dillon Brooks is going to make Paolo recoil, but the Rockets do need wing defense. He does have talent in that regard. He's an okay shooter if you could somehow improve his shot selection. Let's just go with this. I think most Rockets fans would be more okay with Dillon if it came alongside Harden. You could theoretically sign both of those guys with your $60 million, and then with the room exception, get someone else like, say, a Seth Curry, who isn't going to be cheap enough to sign anywhere near the minimum. But all of a sudden, a qualified vet like that, if you could get nearly $8 million as a starting salary, you could be in the ball game for. Now, I'm not necessarily endorsing that plan because that's 3 perimeter players. There's no front court guys added to that mix at all. In reality, the Rockets might want to sign 1 point guard, 1 wing, and 1 big, ideally, and sort of spread the wealth. But just as examples that come to mind, Seth Curry is a classic example of someone that you might not could have gotten without dipping into your salary cap room before, but with the room exception, all of a sudden he becomes a realistic target, right?
Absolutely, and he's one of those guys I would look to target, and they don't necessarily have to use all of it. They could split it up and use it on 2 more players. Let's say they could get Curry for $6 million. Well, then, or I shouldn't say 6. Let's say we could get him for 5. Then you could offer 2.6 million to somebody else for 3 years, where that's more than the minimum. You might be able to get somebody else. But I mean, Curry's the kind of player I would be looking at with that room exception. Yeah.
It's very interesting because I don't even look at him as a guard versus a wing versus. I think it's just I like him as a different option. He has the type of shooting that he has and the type of shots that he can get up. It's something that we don't really have on the roster, and that it's kind of the role that Garrison Matthews used to play and that Armani Brooks used to play that can mesh very well with Şengün. That provides a lot of what Ime Udoka said. Like not all of your shooters need to be 3-and-D wings. It gives you flexibility to run play different types of basketball, because he is one of those. He is elite at what he does, but he is one of those unique archetypes. I love that idea. But moving back to the cap stuff, because I'm not to the same extent, but I'm also a little bit of a cap nerd, and I'm really interested about, now that we've talked about the TPEs and all of the exceptions, I want to ask about what is different when it comes to incentives, and I would guess that these are tied with each other, about extension rules, because the Rockets are about to get in the next few years. They're going to need to do a lot of extensions, we hope, if guys work out.
Sure. So on incentives, and I need to put a general caveat here that even salary cap nerds much more knowledgeable than I am aren't 100% sure how some of these more complex provisions are going to actually be implemented. So if I say something that turns out to be not 100% correct, please don't hold it against me. We're going off the best interpretations we have based on the 91-page term sheet. So one major change on incentives is I think they're going to now cap total compensation or total incentive compensation at 20% of base compensation. And I know that's a lot of complicated words for most of the listeners, but basically what that means is no more KPJ contracts. You can't do these deals that have heavy incentive components to them. Most of the deal needs to be guaranteed, and only 20% total, likely and unlikely, can be incentive based. Another thing is, and again, it's I'm going to be very interested to see how the lawyers word this in the actual CBA. They basically made a Nene rule. As you recall, a couple of years ago, the Rockets attempted to sign Nene to a beautifully inventive contract that had heavy incentive compensation issues, that if he made a certain amount this and he counted for X amount in trade, but the second he was traded, he'd go drop down significantly in what he'd be guaranteed. And it was a beautifully inventive contract, but the league, and my apologies to Rafael, who I know was probably heavily behind that contract. I think the league got it right when they said, "Look,
you're wrong."
We've
argued about this before.
Yeah, that you can't allow this contract, because then every team's going to do it on all their contracts, and it's going to make a complete mockery of the deals. Now, Ben, I won't go too into the weeds. They did do something very similar about a year later with Dante Exum, and that one passed the muster, and that one I thought was good. I think even that one may not be allowed in the new CBA, but I think they learned from their mistake on the Nene one with the Dante Exum contract. But anyway, the league basically said, Rockets, we're not going to interpret this the way you want us to interpret it. You're basically shut down from getting the advantage you wanted to get here. And then I think the new CBA is now going to have a rule put into it to address the Nene situation.
So you talked about incentives and them only being able to be 20%. Does does parts of the contract guarantee dates? Does it also work for that? Or
Yeah. I'm sorry. I misspoke when I said it has to be guaranteed. It doesn't have nothing has to be guaranteed. It's just about incentive-based guarantees.
okay,
So
so
yeah, you
you
can
can
still
still
have
have.
non-guaranteed. Yeah, you can still have
Okay, gotcha.
non-guaranteed deals. Yeah.
That's
And then
perfect.
then to answer your question, Paulo, on extensions, the league, while they haven't completely eliminated the unintended consequences of uh, guys that vastly outperform their contract being able to sign extensions with their team versus hitting free agency, they largely fix the problem by increasing the amount you can extend for from 120 to 120% of your salary to 140%. And it's the greater of your prior salary or the estimated average player salary. So figure 140% of the mid-level at least, even if you're making a small salary. They also relax some of the extend and trade rules. It used to be you could almost never do an extend and trade because you could only get a 5% raise. Now they've increased that. You can get a 20% raise and do an extend and trade. So that should grease the skids on maybe a few more extended trades over the next few years. And then most importantly to the Rockets, they changed extension rules for rookie scale players, first round pick contracts. It used to be if you wanted to extend someone for more than 4 years, you had to give them the max. Well, now you can extend any rookie scale contract for up to 5 years. And that's a huge deal for the Rockets, especially if Jalen or Jabari or Tari Eason or Alperen Şengün is a great player, maybe not quite max, but a guy that the franchise wants to build around long term. This gives the Rockets the ability to lock those guys up an extra year.
I'm surprised that wasn't in place anymore or already.
Yeah, no, it was just for designated max extensions.
Oh, just since you mentioned that, is the rule still there that you can only have, I think, two of them on your team?
Yeah, it used to be you couldn't have more than two Rose Rule guys, which are the rookie scale extension, super max extensions, plus two designated veteran extensions, which are like the Harden, Westbrook, John Wall super max veteran extensions. They have gotten rid of that. There were too many unintended consequences. We were all laughing at Brooklyn last year when they were looking at Durant trades and they literally couldn't make half of the good deals out there because Ben Simmons was on their roster. That's gone away. No more limit. No more limit on those. You can have as many as you want. Now, if you end up with a bunch of them, you're going to be a second apron team, and you're going to get royally screwed.
To close the loop on everything with Nene and the Dante Exum contracts, David, the sense I got, I know there's some differences in those deals, but I think the biggest area the Rockets learned from with that first experience, I know we're going down a rabbit hole a bit here, but I think the NBA really didn't like that the Rockets did not loop them in on the process. They didn't run it by them before. And so I think it made them more likely to step in because they felt like the Rockets were trying to slip something by them. And my personal opinion, and I've shared this with you before, I think that's something you need to handle in collective bargaining, which to their credit, they have this time. I think you learn from it and adapt for the next time. And if you need to do something sooner, then let's talk about it as a league and negotiate it as opposed to acting unilaterally. But I do think clearly the CBA gives Adam Silver in the league office that power. It is what it is. And I think part of the reason that they chose to exercise it in that instance was the fact that they felt a bit blindsided, as opposed to the Dante Exum situation. I know it's not a perfect apples to apples, but I think the reporting since has indicated that the Rockets worked with the league office. They looped them in on the process. And so if they're not feeling blindsided, they're probably much more likely to give you the benefit of the doubt. Is that a fair characterization?
I think you're right in that heavily weighed on the league's decision. I still, as to the underlying substance, I think there are substance differences between the Nene contract and the Exum contract that made the latter more palatable under the CBA than the former. And also, the CBA has a non-circumvention clause, so it's there for a reason. And in my personal opinion, trust me, as someone who I love this stuff. The Nene contract, I was over the moon at how creative it was. I'm probably one of like 20 people in the world that like fully understood how awesome it was. But at the same time, if other teams did it, it was just a slippery slope. It was a bridge too far, I think.
Okay. Fair enough. I will admit that I am not nearly the nerd that you are on this particular subject.
Ben,
So-
you're every bit the nerd I am. You're just a different kind of nerd.
Yes, exactly. I'm a nerd on different things. So yeah, I'm just not the CBA nerd. And so I will fully admit that I do not fully understand the layers and I suppose the slippery slope in terms of what that decision could potentially lead to before the league could address it in the next round of negotiations, which they of course did earlier this year when they were getting out this new CBA. I think another topic I want to broach, because a lot of Rockets fans watching this current Sixers Celtics series are sort of intrigued either way. If the Sixers lose, of course, there's a potential James Harden pursuit this offseason, and that's been talked about for months. If the Sixers somehow upset the Celtics and it's tied at 1, there's a lot of people that are wondering about Jaylen Brown, who will be 1 year out from potentially becoming a free agent. And of course, the pursuit of Brown and whether or not he actually gets closer to free agency is tied in large part to the NBA's awards voting. Because if he's considered an all NBA player on the first, second, or even third team, i.e., top 15 in the league, because each of them have 5 players, then it heavily incentivizes him financially, or at least it did under the old CBA, to sign a deal where he is. Now, of course, we've seen in the past guys can sign those deals and then ask out a year later. It's certainly not without precedent, but it at least stalls the timeline just a bit. So, in terms of a Jaylen Brown pursuit, what does the new CBA mean for those awards categories and the financial tie?
Yeah, so the for Jalen specifically, he's not going to be impacted immediately by the new CBA because that's not going to kick in until after all NBA has been announced for this season.
Oh,
But
okay.
for his situation, if he makes an all NBA team, he's going to be eligible for a designated veteran player extension, one of the super max contracts, and we'll see if Boston gives it to him. The and if they do, I think he'd be crazy not to take it. As you mentioned, he could maybe ask out a year later, but it would have to be a minimum of 1 year. Once you sign a supermax, you cannot be traded for one full year. So, uh, any visions of the Rockets getting him anytime soon would go out the window. But if he doesn't get that contract, if he doesn't make All NBA or he doesn't get offered the supermax by Boston, he's very much in play for the Rockets in 2024, or might want to work his way out of town and go play for his former head coach, Ime Udoka. But that'll definitely be something to watch.
Ben talked about the Celtics half of it. One of the little quirky things that at least Twitter found out about throughout the season after the Harden rumors was that, contrary to what usually happens, the Sixers actually can't offer Harden more money than the Rockets can because of the over 36 rule. Do you know if anything changed about that?
No, it's actually the over 38 rule now. It used to
38,
be the
okay.
over 36. It used to be the over 35 rule. Then it was the over 36 rule. And then in the last CBA, coincidentally, Union President Chris Paul and Union Vice President LeBron James were both going to be subject to the over 36 rule. So they decided to change it to the over 38 rule, which basically prevents you from giving longer than a 3-year contract to anyone who would turn 38 during the contract. So what that ends up doing, because of Harden's current age, the Philly can't give him a 5-year deal. So the over 38 rule prevents the 5th year. They can only offer him a 4-year deal, which is basically the most that any other team can offer in years, meaning that the amount that Philly can offer Harden is only going to be slightly more than what Houston can offer because they can give higher raises. But when you factor in no state income tax in Texas, it's probably a toss-up. If I don't know the actual calculations. Could be Houston. He nets more at the end of the day, post taxes. But it would basically be an apples to apples comparison versus Philly being able to wildly outbid any other team.
Interesting. So they changed the rule, but it's just not enough to change the hard pursuit rule of it.
No, they did not change the rule. The over 38 rule that was in the 2017 CBA.
Oh, okay.
I think unless there was something not in the memo or that I wasn't shared with me, I'm pretty sure over 38 rule is staying in the new CBA. So nothing changes there, I don't think.
Okay, perfect. My next one is actually a lot of people want, and this is a question that I'm sure we'll get a lot. A lot of people want Cam Johnson, and a lot of the good players in free agency that are on the younger side are restricted free agents. What changed as far as if the Rockets were to pursue Cam Johnson, for example? What changed with the new system versus what would have been with the last one?
Sure. So on restricted free agency, qualifying offers have gone up because, basically a qualifying offer, for those who don't know, is the 1 year contract amount that you have to offer a restricted free agent to make them restricted. And for a lot of these guys, it's not a lot of money. So they usually end up in limbo for much of the summer, hoping someone signs them to an offer sheet because they don't want to just take the qualifying offer. Those are going up by 10%, which isn't going to solve that problem, but maybe for a few players a year, it'll make that qualifying offer a little more palatable. If they can't find a good deal they like, just accept the qualifying offer. Also, the offer sheet period is going to go down. This sounds better than it is. It used to be you had the matching team had 48 hours after the offer sheet to match it, and that's going down depending on what time of day you sign the offer sheet.
Oh my
It's
God.
going down. I know it's good. It's literally like if you sign it before noon, it's this much, and if you sign it after noon, it's that much. But basically, 1 day, a day and a half, the team has to match. The reason it's not a big deal is that time period always under the old CBA, and I believe under the new CBA, the time period didn't start until the end of the July moratorium. So you could sign an offer sheet on July 1, but the 48, 36-hour period, whatever it's going to be, didn't start until July 6th.
Yeah.
So it's not really going to help them. It's going to be a little bit better, but it's like if they really wanted to solve the problem, they would have just said it's 36 hours period, even if it's during the moratorium. But they didn't do that.
That's sad. I didn't even realize that you had played for the full moratorium, so it really just makes the change not matter unless
it sucks to be a restricted free agent.
Yeah, unless you're like Colin Sexton and you wait all the way until I think August or whatever it was. My next one actually is not really that relevant to the Rockets, but I know something changed because you told us something changed, and I wonder what changed. What changed about the stretch rule? Which for people who don't know, it's when you waive someone and they have multiple years on their deal, or even 1 year on their deal, you can stretch the dead cap it throughout multiple years. I think the Rockets, they finally get off Troy Williams or whatever his name is this year. They have
Troy Williams. They've had a tiny Troy Williams dead cap hit. I'm actually planning on having a ceremony on June 30th to say goodbye once and for all for the Troy Williams dead cap hit.
Isn't it like the most random amount ever? It's just like 122,000, something like
yep.
that.
Yeah, that's approximately that much. Yeah, pretty much. And it's been on the books since, before Russell Westbrook.
Way before Russell Westbrook.
Yeah.
Troy Williams was, a couple of years before that, at least. I'm looking up to see exactly what it was. Yes, I did it according to Hoops Hype. $122,741. It's finally off the books.
Well, it's not June 30th yet, Ben. Let's not get ahead of ourselves.
Okay. So it's the June 30th party, along with the opening of free agency.
Yes. So
nobody cares about that. Like, who cares about the opening of free agency?
Oh, jeez.
We get Troy Williams off the books.
Seriously, I need like a Boys to Men track or something to like. It's so hard to say goodbye to yesterday. Playing in the background as we say goodbye to Troy Williams. But to answer Paula's question, one wrinkle they're adding. So it used to be you want to waive and stretch someone. When you waive them, you got to make your decision right then. The way it usually works, with some very small exceptions, if you waive and stretch someone, their payment is stretched over twice the years plus one. So if the guy had 2 years left, you stretch the payment obligation over 5 years. But as to the cap hit, you could make a decision. Do I want to stretch the cap hit the same way, or do I want to just take my lumps now? And the team has the choice to do what they want there. But the new CBA is giving teams that stretch guys with multiple years left on their contract the ability to go back and change their cap hit stretch election in subsequent years. So let me use Josh Smith as an example. Josh Smith signed a monster contract with the Detroit Pistons several years ago and ended up getting waived with like 3 years left on his deal. And they waived and they stretched him over like 7 years or something crazy. Under the new CBA, if he had been stretched while this new CBA were in effect, the team could go back like a year or two later and say, you know what, I don't like that he stretched over 5 more years. I'm going to take the rest of the cap hit now. Or if they took the rest of his cap hit over 3 years, and then a year later, they're like, this is a big cap hit. I'm trying to open up cap room. I want to stretch the last year of this cap hit over the next 3 years. So that's going to be that's going to be an interesting wrinkle to the stretch rule. Now you can't do it for like Troy Williams. Let's say last summer the Rockets wanted to do it with Troy Williams. You couldn't have done it in that situation. You can only do it for so long as the contract would have been in effect.
Yeah.
So once you get to the out years of the stretch, you can't do it, but you can do it in the early years of the stretch.
So basically, it matters if you all of a sudden change from a contending team to a rebuilding team, or if you all of a sudden are a rebuilding team and you make a huge leap and you want to invest now. But that it basically allows you to change it and not be stuck with your decisions from the past, as long as the contract would still be running.
Yeah, pretty much.
I've got a question I want to throw in before we move on from restricted free agency. One of the debates that the Rockets are going to have in the coming weeks is how to handle KJ Martin, because they could make him restricted this offseason and perhaps utilize all that salary cap space they have to get him on friendlier terms, the same way they did. Well, they didn't have the salary cap space, but it's the same principle with what they did with Jayshawn Tate a year ago. And because you're giving him a new deal a year early, he's incentivized to give you slightly friendlier terms. You could perhaps front load it just a bit since you do have all that salary cap space this summer, and that makes it even more plausible. On the other hand, if you want to use your salary cap space on external additions, like we mentioned, James Harden and Dylan Brooks as one of a number of potential targets, we just happened to throw them out earlier, then if you want to make full use of your $60 million externally, then perhaps you just wait until KJ is unrestricted a year from now, as opposed to turning down his team option and making him restricted this offseason. David, does the new CBA change at all the calculus for what you do with KJ in terms of whether it's beneficial financially to let him enter restricted free agency a year early, or the case for just playing it out and letting him become unrestricted in 2024?
No, CBA isn't going to change the KJ Martin situation.
Okay.
It is an interesting calculus for the Rockets. I think you laid it out really well. But nothing in the new CBA is going to change that calculus.
Do you have any insight or perspective on what you would do with KJ?
It really is a tough call. So much depends on what they think they can do in free agency.
Yeah.
If they think they're going to add some veterans that play similar positions, the 3-4, and especially because Jabari Smith and Tari Eason are two surefire building blocks that play the same position as him pretty much. And you got Jayshawn Tate that there's overlap. I'm inclined to say pick up the option because then it's easier to trade him.
Agreed.
But Martin really grew by leaps and bounds last year. I think he's a terrific player. But if you're going to find, you got Jabari, you got Tari, and if you're adding a veteran who overlaps too much with him, I think you got too many decent players playing the same roles. I say maybe move them for a future asset, which means pick up the option, which would make it easier to trade them.
Yeah, I agree. It's just I think a lot of people don't realize, and I actually just posted it before the podcast, a trade on Twitter that had was combining Christopher and Titan and Jayshawn Tate. I think a lot of people don't really realize that next year you're not running anything more than a 9, maximum 10-man rotation. And just between KPJ, Jalen, Şengün, Jabari, Tari, our pick this year, and KPJ if he stays, that's already 7 players. You have 60 million in cap space. You're going to bring in vets. Even keeping all of the guys that I just named, which are the ones people value the most, is going to cause a lot of issues, because even if it is a 9-man rotation or a 10-man rotation, there's going to be guys that are only playing 15, 18 minutes a night that you'd want them to play more. So imagine what happens to guys like KJ, Jason Tate, Josh Christopher, Ty, Garuba. Like, these guys are just not going to touch the floor for a really long time unless there's injuries, so that their values are going to tank. But I'm not going to get into that. I got a different question. Let's talk about the in-season tournament, what it is, and when does it kick in? Do we get an in-season? Do we get to raise our in-season tournament banners next year, or when does it start?
It is supposed to start next season. That they want to go full board into it. There is so much logistically that needs to go into it. The term sheet has like agreement to agree language, which as a lawyer I hate. Which basically they're saying we got most of it figured out. We don't have 100% of it figured out. The sides will get it done. The sides will get it done. But they're looking to put it in next year, and it's very creative how they're doing it. They really set out the process, how it's going to work. God bless the schedule makers, because this is going to be a monster for them to deal with. But I don't know how much you want me to go into how it's going to work, but it is going to go in. Basically, there'll be a group stage where everyone's divided up into random groups, and whoever has the best records from those groups and a couple of wild cards are going to play an 18 single elimination tournament. The final 4 is going to be in a neutral location. And then basically the teams from the players on each of the 8 finalists, the quarter finalists, are going to get bonuses. So there's some financial reward there to the players, and no non-financial reward. Like, you don't get a draft pick, you don't get an automatic playoff berth, but it looks interesting. And I think much like with soccer and European basketball, I think the hope is this kind of builds momentum, and over the years kind of becomes a thing that everybody looks forward to. And most importantly, it's one more thing for the NBA to monetize with its TV partners when negotiating the new TV deal, which means more money for everybody.
Yeah, and you potentially need to offset reduced money given the whole regional sports network model collapsing, as we've discussed in recent episodes, what the implications are there. Thankfully, the Rockets have a bit of a band-aid. The current contracts with DirecTV and AT&T and the other distributors run through 2032. But yeah, with that landscape changing and cord cutting taking away the traditional cable bundle, there is going to be a hit to not just the Rockets, to revenue streams all around the league. That's coming. And so any new ideas to generate revenue, like an in-season tournament, should definitely be welcome to help offset that. The one thing I will say, though, David, while I would love to see the Rockets win that, before we put up a banner for a new in-season tournament, can we get a banner for the Bubble Rockets? Have you noticed that there is still no...
Where the hell is their division championship banner?
Why they don't even have to put up a banner. You just have to put 2019-20. I still don't understand.
They can't do Russell Westbrook like this.
I know, the disrespect to the Bubble Rockets. My God. Anyway,
yeah.
So I think we're going to try.
Can we put Daniel House's face on it?
Oh God.
Can we can we make like little devil horns on top of it as well, so we can say it's Horny House?
Our listens are now in the toilet.
Your podcast ratings are going to go down.
Yeah. All right. So one more salary cap question from each of us, or new CBA question, I should say, because it goes more than just the salary cap before we can try and wind this thing down. The one that I've got that I want to make sure we address is the changes to the draft process, because while it's not going to impact this year, one thing that I've read about that really interests me, and I think this is a good move, is this new policy that requires the sharing of medicals. Because in the past, it's been so easy for a player, a prospect that is, and or his agent to try and steer their way to a certain destination, which of course can really work to the detriment of smaller markets that aren't that desirable by simply not providing medicals, by not working out. And then, of course, it's riskier for the team to draft that player since they don't have the full picture of where he's at physically. And so it makes it a lot easier the way it's been for a prospect to sort of bully his way to a given destination, as opposed to this new CBA seeks to address that by standardizing the medical process and everything that goes on at the combine to where it's available to everyone. And so with that, it's going to be a bit harder. Certainly, you can still Eli Manning style leak that a prospect isn't interested in a given destination. And I suppose there's some pressure there, but honestly, with the contract being locked in, at some point a team has just got to do what they've got to do and go with the best talent available. Now that you're reducing the medical risk by making that information widely available, in fact, it was reported last year that Chet Holmgren didn't fully share his medicals with all the teams in the lottery, and perhaps that played a role in him going to Oklahoma City. Now you're going to, I don't think it's this draft cycle. I believe it's next draft cycle because, of course, the combine is just about 10 days away. But to me, that's a really positive development when we talk about overall fairness and parity. David, is that the way that you've read that component of it?
Yeah, I mean, it's actually much broader than that. I think the medical sharing of medical information is the single biggest takeaway from the changes in the CBA. But basically, draft prospects are going to have to almost fully participate in the combine. They're going to have to do drills,
Wow.
measurements, medicals, team interviews, media availability, everything except 5-on-5 scrimmages. And if you don't do it, you're not draft eligible.
Wow.
I love that.
So it used to be the combine. You're lucky if a few first rounders showed up to take a couple of measurements and do some interviews and then left. And, you get almost no first rounders doing the scrimmages. While I wasn't a huge fan of the Josh Christopher pick on draft night, I did respect the hell out of him. He was one of the few guys that rated in the top 40 who actually did the 5-on-5 at the combine. And I respected the hell out of that. The new CBA is not going to change that. Most of the top guys are not going to do 5-on-5, but they got to do everything else. And even if they have a legit excuse, there's very limited excuses. Like if you're playing FIBA ball overseas, you still got to come and make up the stuff or you're not draft eligible. So, and then when it comes to the medicals, the medicals are not going to be shared with every team. For the top prospects, they're only going to be shared with teams that are generally within the draft range that they're expected to go. And the teams will come up with a list like, here are the top 10 guys. And these are the ones you're right. This is not going to apply to this coming draft. It's going to start in 2024. But if it was in place for 2023, they wouldn't release Victor Wembanyama's medicals to every team. They'd only do it to teams drafting like in the top 10. And it's kind of cascades, so on and so forth with that. But yeah, Paulo, it's really going to increase the viability of the combine and make it. I mean, it literally is a necessity if you want to get drafted.
Yeah, I think they could even do it. I mean, I can think off the top of my head of 2 ways they could do it. I'm not sure if those are the ways, but you could do it the same way or by the same process that they do the invites to the green. I think it's called the green room during draft night.
Mm-hmm.
Like every team send out invites, or it could even be hey, each team gets 10 requests to make per pick that they have, for example. And so maybe that doesn't work with the range part of it.
You might be right, Paulo. I'm not 100% sure how they're going to do. They do have vague language that the teams will be polled to see who they have rated high. But it may be a very similar process as how they determine who the top 10 guys are expected to be.
Okay, so I mean, I had the question. Ben kind of stole it, but I still have some angles of it left. The first one, and I'll separate it into two, just still related to the draft combine, but not really a question, is I hope they do it like the NFL and we actually get to see it, because that would be exciting. Like I remember back during the last 2 drafts that I wish I could have watched more of the combine, like the actual measurements and stuff. I wish we could. They should monetize it, because
I think they show a good chunk of it on NBA TV.
They do it. It's not everything, and I remember we kind of hear a lot of measurements through Twitter. It's weird, but the actual question is, the first one is, so we can put to bed the rumors that there were earlier on of a double draft. So just so everybody listening can take that out of their minds, there's not going to be a double draft anytime soon, or
Correct. They're not getting rid of one and done.
yeah. Okay, that's one of them that I want just to put out there as a PSA. And the other one was, what are the changes to the minimum team salary?
Sure. So I think if it wasn't 2017, it was the one prior, established a minimum team salary. Every team had to spend up to 90% of the salary cap. And if you didn't, at the end of the year, you basically have to write a check to the union for the difference between what your salary was and 90% of the cap. And that money would get distributed to that team's players. So, for instance, 2 years ago, the Oklahoma City Thunder did not reach the floor, the minimum team salary, and had to cut a big check. And some guys on the Thunder made more from the check they got because the Thunder didn't hit the floor than their actual salaries. And last year, the Spurs and the Pacers went into the season below the floor. Pacers went above it by doing the Miles Turner renegotiation and extension. Spurs stay below the floor. Spurs are going to have to cut a check to their players. Under the new CBA, you cannot be below the floor, below the minimum team salary by the start of the regular season. If you are, you immediately lose that cap room and you have to immediately write a check to the union. So you'd still be 10% below the cap, but all the benefits of being below the minimum salary go right out the window. And to further discourage teams, well, it's okay if you go in next year. This penalty isn't going to kick in until the second year of the new CBA. If you don't spend the minimum team salary that season, you don't get a luxury tax distribution. So much of the benefit of not paying your players is completely gone. So teams no more. So, and this does affect the Rockets. Like, let's say they don't find any free agents they like. They're not going to just say, well, we'll carry the $60 million into the season. You can't do that. You got to spend it, or at least most of it. You can spend it on 1-year deals and you'll have cap room the next year, but you got to spend it or you're going to lose it.
That's very interesting. I actually have one last question that
once you ask your question, I'm going to chastise both of you for not asking me about the most important parts. Go ahead, Paul.
Okay, so I'm guessing that the most important parts are going to be the Hinkie special now not being special anymore. And
that wasn't what I was going to chastise for you, but you know me well, Paulo.
My last question was, there was a lot of talk about the teams that are, and we didn't talk a lot about the punishments for the being over the second apron because, well, I don't think any of us believe that Rockets will ever be in that position. But
yeah, but I'll tell you that was what I was going to chastise for you for not bringing it up because it affects the Rockets' direct competition.
Yeah, and the other thing I was actually going to talk about that might affect the Rockets is, so we know one of the punishments is draft picks, the team's own draft picks being shifted from whatever they would be to the end of the first round. My question is, if someone owns that team's pick, do they get punished for that team being over the second apron? Because, I mean, the Clippers pick right now, if we were following the current rules, would actually not be 20, it would be 20th, but you're not punishing the Clippers, you're punishing the team that traded for their pick.
So to answer that question, I want to take a step back and just quickly run through the restrictions because you named probably one of the most severe ones, but it's highly conditional that it comes to that. So we talked earlier in the first apron, no non-taxpayer mid-level, no biannual, no acquiring players via sign and trade. Under the new CBA, there's going to be more restrictions on first apron team, which again is inclusive of second apron teams. You cannot bring TPEs into the offseason. If you make a trade, you generate a $5 million TPE that you want to use in the offseason. Nope, you're going to lose it in the offseason. You cannot sign buyout players. So now, what a buyout player means, it's kind of a defined term. If a guy is making more than the non-taxpayer mid-level amount and gets cut and waived, you cannot sign them in free agency. So that'll take away most of the buyout market for you. And then also your salary matching and trades are going to go down significantly. Now, I told you earlier that salary matching rules are going to be easier for teams that go a little into the tax. But now, if you go above the apron, it's going to be worse than it was under the taxpayer under the 2017 CBA, where they're going to phase it in. They're going to make it a little worse next year, but the year after, you cannot take back more salary than you trade out. You have to trade equal or more salary out than you take in, so you can't build up your payroll that way. For second apron, and again, this, in my opinion, is the most significant change in the CBA is the second apron, which is about 17.5 million over the tax. Again, that's going to grow, but figure 17.5 million over the tax this year. You go above that, you cannot use the tax pyramid level. Done. You only minimum salaries. Starting in 2024, you cannot aggregate salaries in trades. If you have two $10 million players and you want to trade for a $20 million player, nope, can't do it. Starting in 2024, you cannot use cash in trades. You can't buy a second round pick. You can't throw some money in to grease the skids on a trade. No cash. Also starting in 24, Bobby Marks and I have been going back and forth on what this actually means. Either you cannot use a TPE that's generated from a sign and trade, or if someone is signed and traded, you can never acquire them while they're on that contract. It's one or the other. Bobby and I have different interpretations. Yeah.
Damn.
I think I'm right in that I think so look at what the Warriors did when Kevin Durant wanted to go to Brooklyn, where they signed and traded him and used that TPE to bring in D'Angelo Russell. My reading of this is that you can't do that anymore. That you couldn't bring in a D'Angelo Russell from the Kevin Durant TPE. But we'll see. That may or may not be the truth. But then to your one, Paulo, is draft related. So starting in 24-25, if you are a second apron team, your seventh first round pick out, which I think is either going to be the 31 pick or the 2031 or 2032 pick in the first year here, will become what's called a frozen pick. That pick, you cannot trade it. If you're a second apron team, it freezes. You cannot trade that pick. It's not an asset for you anymore. You still can pick it. You can use it on a player. You cannot trade it. And then the thing you were talking about, Paulo, if you are a repeat offender in the second apron, and you are in the second apron 3 out of 5 years. So the Golden States, the LA Clippers of the world that are perennial huge spenders. Once you've gone 3 times in 5 years, that frozen pick moves to the end of the first round. So you could be a big spender in 1 year, be a repeated violator, become a repeat second apron team. And by the time that pick comes around, you may be in a rebuilding phase. That could be the number 1 pick of the draft, but nope. It's the 30th pick of the draft. And to answer your specific question, Paulo, I believe the situation you brought up where what if another team owns it? I think the way it's set up is because it's a frozen pick, another team could not own it. And because it's not starting until such a far out year, none of those picks have been traded yet.
Yeah, that's probably why it's so far out. It's to make sure that the pick hasn't been traded yet. And also, I think I figured out the last thing you're going to I can't say the word you said because
I was also going to say, I told you luxury tax rates are going down for small taxpayers. If you're a big taxpayer, the rates are going. We thought they were huge before. They're all going up. If you get above 10 million over the tax, obscenely high rates. Yep. Obscene. But Paulo, go ahead because I think I know what you're going to guess.
Now you just can't be a double luxury tax team anymore. The punishments are just so heavy. Even if you were to bring in a star, the way we know super teams fail, like the Nets failed, like I don't think it's worth it to give up all of that just to make a super team or one of those really high level super teams. But okay,
you have to be a team like the Warriors that drafted very well and just keeps all your guys. And the Warriors would generally be fine. Curry, Clay, Draymond, Kevon Looney, Jordan Poole, all those guys would be fine, but you wouldn't have an Andrew Wiggins.
And that's massive for them. I mean, look at the difference on their record since he was gone. He is massive for that team, and then they pay him, I think, near max money. I don't know how much the extension is, but they're only able to keep a lot of these guys because they don't worry about it. And then Andrew Wiggins is one of them. My guess is I did not ask you about the fact that the MLE can be used as a TPE now.
Yeah,
Is that it?
that's one of my favorite. What starting it's not next year, I think the year after. If you don't use your MLE or your biannual, and this is non-taxpayer mid-level, room mid-level, or biannual, not the taxpayer mid-level. They're not going to reward the tax-paying teams with this. But the other three mid-level, the other three exceptions, if you don't use them during the season, they become trade exceptions. You can use them not just to sign a free agent, but to acquire a player via trade that fits into that exception.
So but it happens the year after you go without using them, right? So
No. It doesn't matter if you use them the prior year. It's just that little nugget of the CBA is not going to go into effect until 24-25 season.
Okay, but so if I don't spend, let's say it would be next year. If the Rockets didn't spend their MLE next year, during that season they could use it to trade for someone.
No, I mean you got to use it in the season. You can't carry it over. But yeah,
exactly. That's
yeah.
So it's during the actual season. Yeah.
So let's say they use all their cap room but don't use the room exception. They can carry that. Sorry, it won't apply this year. Let's say next year the Rockets don't use their non-taxpayer mid-level during the summer of 2024. They go into the 24-25 season without using it. Trade deadline comes up. There's a $13 million player they really like. They can trade for him using the non-taxpayer mid-level as a trade exception.
Didn't we go? I don't know how many years without using our MLE when Harden was here. I mean, we wouldn't have used it on trades anyways, but it would have been useful.
Well,
if that were the case.
I mean, the most notable use of it was PJ Tucker. And then since PJ Tucker, it's mostly been using bits and pieces of it. And this will segue into one of my other favorites. You kind of indicated it earlier, Paulo, is a lot of times teams don't use their full mid-level because they want to save a little sliver of it to sign their second-round picks. Well, guess what? New CBA has a new salary cap exception for second-round picks. You can, if you have a second-round pick, you can sign them to a 3 or 4 year deal for a higher minimum salary than the rookie minimum, and it's not going to count against it won't count against any of your other exceptions. So you can use your full mid-level and give your second-round pick a little more than the rookie minimum, and you can do both of those things.
Second-round pick guy is lit.
I am so lit about this. I'm very
one
excited.
last one. And on that exception, do the opt out on the third year be restricted? Opt out or pick up the fourth year be unrestricted still apply?
The exception specifically allows for team options.
Yeah, but so it would work the same way KJ Martin does on the third and fourth year thing.
Exactly. You could sign KJ Martin's contract under this exception. They wouldn't have had to use a sliver of the mid-level. Like KJ Martin, Armani Brooks, Garrison Matthews, all these guys signed with slivers of the non-taxpayer mid-level. Now you could, well, maybe not Garrison Matthews, but now for guys like KJ Martin or one of the many second-round picks they had, those types of contracts, you can sign those types of contracts using the second-round pick exception. The Armani Brooks wasn't a good example. That's the same contract structure, but he wasn't a second-round pick. But you understand what I'm talking about. Those types of deals, if you take a player in the second round, you have this exception available to you. One more reason to value second-round picks.
Yeah, but my question was actually on the back end of it, like how does the free agency part of it works when the contract ends? Are they restricted at the third year and then unrestricted on the fourth, like KJ is? Under that restriction?
Yeah, that's not going to change. Restricted free agency for non-first round picks is not going to change. First 3 years restricted, fourth year and beyond unrestricted.
Gotcha.
All right, we're nearly
and Ben, one thing I'll toss in here because I didn't want it to go without saying it, is that, you know, we said how difficult team building is going to be for teams in the apron levels. If you're not in the apron level, all of the trade matching, the salary matching rules, the 175%, the $5 million gap, the $100,000 trade allowance. All of those are getting more lenient, and salary matching is going to get better for all the teams below the first apron. So you're going to see maybe more trades than you did before, because it's going to be easier to make trades than it was under the prior CBA.
Yeah, they want everyone to get to the first apron, basically, and they're going to make it as easy as possible to get there.
Well, I don't think they want teams in the first apron, but they're going to make it easy for you as long as you're below it.
Yeah, they want you to get like right up against it, I think.
Well, I'm sure Tillman would like every other team to get right up against the first apron, so he can get all the luxury tax revenue.
And I keep saying the name wrong. I didn't mean the apron. I meant the tax line, the first tax level. They want you to get like all the way up to the first tax level.
Yeah, I mean, all in all, this was a pretty good combination of punishing the high payroll teams, rewarding the non-high payroll teams, and there's a whole bunch of stuff for the players, but we don't need to get into that today. But I thought it was a pretty good CBA.
Yeah. For anybody who wants to nag David more about this stuff, you can do it at BeamAThug on Twitter. Before we leave off, I think a good way to put a bow on this and tie a few of these themes together, David, what you were getting at a few minutes ago was that beyond the benefits for Houston directly, it can also be beneficial in that several of your super high spending rivals, and in the Western Conference, that's teams like the Clippers, the Warriors, the Lakers can be in that tier. It's going to be much more prohibitive for them to go above and beyond the way they have under previous CBAs. So both for the Rockets themselves and some of their competition in the West, the really marquee markets and flagship franchises, it should help the Rockets on multiple levels. And I think a good way to illustrate that with this offseason, we've mentioned Dillon Brooks in passing a few times, and we know the issues. Obviously, he's a talented young wing that can defend, but issues with A, shot selection, and B, some of the antics. Paolo is not a fan. David, is it fair to say you're at least not over the moon about Dillon Brooks?
I think that's a fair assessment.
Okay.
Yeah, the warts are very real.
Yeah. So one of the pushbacks to that I've seen from not necessarily his supporters, but people that are open to Dillon Brooks is that if not Dillon, who? And it becomes sort of tricky once you get past the top tier, the James Harden, Kyrie Irving level guys. Once you go down a little bit into that, let's say starting salary in the 20s, that tier, all of a sudden it's a bit trickier to see where the alternatives are, especially because there's a lot of other guys that it remains to be seen. Do they opt out? Do their current teams want them back? How does their playoff run in? There's a lot of uncertainty. Where I think this CBA could be useful, I'm just going to give one example, but it could play out elsewhere. Let's look at some of these restricted free agents. And I know a lot of people are reluctant to truly look at some of the restricted options because they're afraid that the original team could just match. That's certainly the case with Cam Johnson, as we talked about earlier with Brooklyn. Let's look at Austin Reeves. That's someone that I think there's skepticism by many that the Lakers will let him go. But all of a sudden, if you're the Lakers and you have Anthony Davis on the books long term, I know LeBron is 38, but I think they want to keep him as long as he can play. Even though it's not as if the new CBA takes effect overnight, matching on a young guy like Reeves, that's something that a big market team like the Lakers, even with their revenue streams, would have to think long and hard about in regards to giving them a significant bump in their annual salary next year because of what the restrictions could be like 2-3 years down the road. I'm not necessarily endorsing Austin Reeves, but David, is it fair to say that that's a quality example of a guy who might be slightly more gettable based on the enhanced restrictions of the new CBA and what that makes a team like the Lakers have to think about?
Slightly, yes. The Lakers, it just so happens we're catching the Lakers in a summer when they actually have some flexibility. Because remember, before they made the Russell Westbrook trade, he was going to be coming off the books, and D'Angelo Russell's coming off the books for them. If they want to bring everybody back, well, then yeah, they're going to have some tough decisions to make. But unless you could put together a really nasty offer sheet for Austin Reeves that makes the Lakers think twice. But I think And I think Rafael's probably indicated that he probably doesn't want to put out a bunch of offer sheets that are just god awfully bad contracts just so the other team won't match it, because then we're
No,
stuck with the god awful contract. But
No, I'm not
I think
suggesting awful. I'm just saying a reasonable contract that if the Lakers hypothetically re-sign D'Angelo Russell, because it's not like they could easily replace him on the open market, and especially if they look like, and they do right now, look like a really good team, then all of a sudden, even a moderate contract to a guy like Reeves, and again, I'm not necessarily endorsing him specifically, just using him as an example, that might be something that the original team has to think about a bit more.
Yeah, although, and again, conceptually, you are right, Ben. As to the specific example, I think the Lakers benefited a lot from that Westbrook trade, because not only did they get Russell, but they got Malik Beasley, who has a team option. If they really love Reeves and want to pay up for him, they can decline the option on Beasley and pick Reeves over Beasley. They got Jared Vanderbilt on a really cheap team option that they'd be foolish not to pick up. So, they could basically consider this as, okay, we're going to pay up for Reeves, but we're going to basically swap him out for Beasley. So as to the specific Reeves example, I think I would be surprised if he isn't a Laker next year. But if someone offers a lot of money to him, this new CBA is going to make the Lakers think a little bit longer and a little bit harder about it.
Okay, let me give you an example that might work a little bit better. And I am definitely not endorsing this. But if you hypothetically were to get James Harden and he wanted to be reunited with, let's say, his good buddy, Eric Gordon, that's someone that the Clippers might have a slightly tougher time justifying keeping around, given all the massive figures they already have on their books. It's not as if the Clippers could just splurge for Gordon and give him a new deal without consideration for anything else, the way Steve Ballmer has in recent years.
Yes. Now, as we all know, Eric Gordon has a $20 million non-guaranteed salary next year that will become guaranteed at the end of June. And the Clippers have a very hard decision to make. Do they want to waive him and shed 20 million in payroll, or do they want to keep him, which means they're going to be paying many times over 20 million in luxury tax and suffer some of the consequences of the apron? Now, in that situation, it's only one more year, but are you talking more about an extension for him?
Yeah, either scenario, because
For one more year, you're just talking money. But if it's an extension,
there's been rumors that
yeah.
Gordon might prefer to give back that year and get an extension at a slightly lower AAV for the sake of more money, I suppose, guaranteed. So if there's a hypothetical extension, all of a sudden that might be a consideration for the Clippers.
Absolutely. And Steve Ballmer is going to have to decide, he's certainly shown the willingness to spend with no limit on his roster, but is he willing to suffer the consequences of all the restrictions on roster building that he's going to face?
Okay.
And that's going to be a tough call for him.
There we go. Yeah, I just wanted to provide a concrete example of an option that the new CBA could conceivably help put into play that might be an option in the, let's say, non-Dillon Brooks tier of guys that might come available for a starting salary 15 to 30 million, somewhere in that range. There's initial AAV figure, not quite the max, but definitely well above the mid-level, someone in that upper middle class tier. And so Reeves, Gordon, those are a couple of guys that I look at from those teams at the very top of the income bracket when we're talking about, or the spenders, I should say, the Warriors, the Clippers, the Lakers, those types of franchises. And yeah, I just wanted to illustrate how the new CBA might give you a few more options. If you're looking at the market and saying, I'm not crazy about Dillon Brooks given the extenuating circumstances, then maybe there's even more options than the guys we're looking at. Anyway, we've been going for an hour and a half. I think we've covered enough. Again, if you want to get at David even more, nag him at Beamathog on Twitter. Last thing we do before we close out, I'm going to get an answer from each of you guys very quickly. I'm going to do a tankathon spin, and then we're all going to draft for the Rockets based on where they are in this spin. And of course, we're just going to be projecting who's going to be on the board at that point. So I'm going to sim this, and hopefully they're at 1, and so we don't have to even go through this exercise. But I think since this is one of our last shows for the draft lottery, let's have some fun. 3, 2, 1, sim. Oh man, this is actually the toughest one. So Utah jumped all the way up to number 1. Charlotte is at number 2. Detroit is number 3. The Rockets are at 4. What do you do if you're at 4, David?
Well, I'm assuming Victor's 1 and 2 and 3 in some combination is Scoot and Brandon Miller.
Yes.
Gun to my head at 4, I'm probably taking Amen Thompson.
Yeah, I think I am too. I think even though the overtime elite concerns are valid, I just think he has a gear. He has a level of upside that is higher than anyone else. You could talk me into Juris Walker, but I do think there's a little bit of an overlap with Jabari Smith and Tari Eason, two defensive-minded forwards that are already on your roster in terms of how exactly he fits in your puzzle. So I think I would gamble on the upside of Amin Thompson in that scenario. Paolo, you?
Man, so basically, I'll say first, my ideal scenario in this case is to trade the pick away for some sort of a high tier player, or whatever it might be that actually is already in the league, because I'm not buying either of the Thompson twins.
But let's just say the value isn't there, and you just have to make the most of the pick.
Yeah. Secondly, that's a really interesting scenario because one's going to be Wemby, but both Charlotte and Detroit have a point guard.
Good point.
So who knows? Maybe Scoot falls to he's not, because they just trade for him.
You basically have to say, okay, 420 plus what gets me Scoot.
Yeah.
Listen. If it's to jump up from 4 to getting Scoot, I'll give them everything I own. I don't care. I'm that in love.
By the way, Paulo, excellent job completely avoiding the question.
Listen, I'm learning with Raphael Stone. Okay, I'm just following the footsteps. Now,
if there's no trade option,
and I can't dodge the question again by saying I'm going with the meme pick and taking Grady Dick, I'm going to take. I don't think you can just. I do have Jarvis Walker higher on my board than Amen Thompson, I think, at this point. But for the Rockets, I don't think it makes sense. I'm going with Amen Thompson.
Yeah. Side note, how much would it suck if the freaking Utah Jazz end up with Wemby?
It's at least better than if it were the Mavericks.
I'm already resigned to him either being a Spur or a Jazz. But LBT and I have both said, oh, he's going to be on one of those two teams. I just know it.
Okay, well, let's consider this the reverse jinx. Now that you've put it out there, it's definitely not going to happen.
That's exactly my intent. That's exactly my intent.
I mean, listen,
although I think by saying it, maybe that undoes the reverse jinx.
The difference between Utah at 9 and Dallas at 10 is 1.5% odds, which is a lot considering that Dallas has 3% and Utah has 4.5%. But as much as I hate the Spurs and as much as I hate the Jazz, the one thing I would lock in, please don't happen, is please don't give them to Dallas, dude.
Oh, I've already told Stacey that we're gonna have to get a divorce if that happens.
Oh God, that would be terrible.
It's just so unfair.
If they tank their way into Wemby, that's going to be disgraceful.
For those that don't know, my wife is a Mavs. She's from Dallas. She's a Mavs fan.
Yeah,
I've already threatened divorce.
Imagine the reaction Adam Silver would have after the entire thing that they made about them intentionally missing the playoffs.
Yeah.
Like, if there was one thing that they would rig the lottery for, it would probably be for the Mavs not to get it after everything that went through and with them intentionally tanking out of the play-in.
I know I just did a podcast with Clay Allen talking about how difficult it would be to fix the lottery logistically these days, since there's no more envelopes you could conceivably freeze. The 4-digit number combinations, that would be pretty difficult with the accounting firm and everyone else in the room to have any shenanigans with. With all that said, my God, the NBA would need to somehow have a conspiracy to keep Wemby out of Dallas after everything that happened. If nothing else, Adam Silver has to earn his paycheck by finding a way not to let Wemby to Dallas. Otherwise, God, that would make a mockery of the entire system.
Wait,
and one last thing. Marriage.
One last thing before we close. That just happened, or at least I just noticed that it happened. I don't know if draft workouts are already going on, but Get Howard has a picture on his Instagram of him in a Rockets workout tee. So I don't know if he worked out, if he just owns one for some reason. But that's your first little bit of draft of draft slop as
workouts are going on. Yeah, workouts have already started, and ooh man, that'd be a nice guy to get at 20.
I love him, dude.
Yeah, it would be. And yeah, workouts are going on. They brought in a few guys already. It's just the true top tier. Of course, they're waiting to see the lottery results because they don't want to waste their time. But yeah, you are seeing, I would say, the guys that aren't potentially in play for the very, very top, they're starting to do their circuit, guys that are not going to be affected by the lottery. And so the Rockets are already looking at some of those guys, and a few of them either coming into Toyota Center, maybe there's a group workout somewhere else. But yeah, that process is underway. So that reminds me, with Rockets Run, I just put together my annual workout tracker list to sort of have a one-stop shop for where all of these guys are going, and specifically those that have stopped by or visited with the Rockets in some capacity. Anyway, we've gone on long enough for one show. We'll save that for a future episode, perhaps next week, if we get more tidbits about who those players are that the Rockets are already bringing in or looking at. For one day, I think we've gone on for long enough. So for David and Paolo, I'm Ben. I want to thank everyone for listening to us ramble about CBA and nerd basketball stuff for an hour and a half. If you've made it through this extended podcast, we really, really thank you. And hopefully you learned something from this. Hopefully we provided some value for you. Anyway, if you want even more beyond what we have discussed over the last 90 plus minutes, the best place to get it, as I mentioned earlier, is on Twitter. David is on there at @BeamAThug. Paolo is on there at Paolo Alves NBA, and I'm on there at Ben Dubose. Besides the three of us, you should also follow the show, The Logger Line, on Twitter, because not only can you get our episodes right when they come out, we've got a link tree that's super helpful. You can just hit up that link tree, and certainly you can find our distributors, Apple, Google, Spotify, and find our episodes that way. But you can also find our links to Carbach Brewing, Sports Talk 790, Rockets Wire, all of our sponsors, friends, and partners. You can access their content and show some love to them as well. With those plugs complete, we will adjourn. Again, for David and Paolo, I'm Ben. Thanks as always for listening, and please come back soon for another new episode of The Logger Line.